Composition at its core is the way elements are arranged within an image. So it's not just about what is in your composition, it's also about the relationship between these elements that creates a deeper meaning. And that's why composition is so important, because if you have too many distractions or the relationship between the elements in your composition is not clear, your subject kind of gets lost and your viewer won't understand what the photo is actually about. So in this video, I'll break down how to choose what to keep in your composition and how to use composition methods like framing, negative space, and leading lines, and so on to establish a relationship between the different elements so your photos tell a clear story. And by the way, I do have a free ebook covering these different composition methods, including practical exercises to practice each of these. Just click the first link in the pinned comment to sign up for my email list and I'll send it to you right away. And I promise I won't spam you. After sending you the ebook, I'll send you occasional photography tips or challenges. Okay, with that being said, let's start from the beginning. How do you actually decide what needs to be in your composition and what needs to be left out? Firstly, you need a subject and supporting subjects. And to understand what supporting subjects are, just think about movies for a second. Usually these movies or stories have a main character and supporting characters. Usually the job of these supporting characters is to reveal more information about the main character or to make them look more interesting, make them look strong or caring. And I think it's the same in photography. Just instead of main characters, we have our main subject. And instead of supporting characters, we have supporting subjects. And the job of these supporting subjects is to give context about your main subject and to emphasize how interesting your main subject is or how unique it is. And if one element in your composition doesn't help you emphasize your main subject and it distracts from the main subject, you need to get rid of it. But that opens up two new questions. How do you make sure your supporting subjects actually support your subject and don't steal all the attention? And secondly, how do you get rid of elements that don't support your subject? And the answer to both questions is balancing your composition and using composition methods. So let's have a look at a negative example first. So in this case, the composition feels very unbalanced because we have too many things going on. So we have this ship on the right here that kind of is cut off at the edge of the composition, which is generally unpleasant to look at. And we also have this foreground right here that is just very bright and has too much visual weight. So it basically means it's too prominent and it's too visible compared to other things in the composition. And this foreground doesn't do anything for the story I was trying to tell. I wanted to focus on this container ship in the background that is just humongous. And these three things, or these two things, the ship and the foreground, don't really help me tell the story, and they kind of distract because they are very prominent. So if you just remove the brushes, in this case, you can easily fix it just by cropping, because for this composition, I need two things. I need my main subject, the container ship, and I need a good supporting subject that helps me emphasize the size of my subject in this case, because that is what's unique about my main subject. So I need this container ship and I need the small ship that we have right here. So if we just crop this image, let me see. Okay, let's do this and we remove the foreground and remove the ship on the right. We don't need that. This is already looking better, but now we have too much headspace. We have too much room above my main subject. So I'll just, if we look at it, we have less distractions, but it's still unbalanced because we have a lot going on the bottom side and nothing going on at the top. And we don't need all the space at the top. So I'll just crop it further to just make it look a little more balanced again. And this is already looking way better. I feel like maybe I'll just do it a little more, remove a little more of the top. Yes, this is looking way better. And now suddenly the photo is about this ship in the foreground, our supporting subject, which is by no means tiny. You can see a couple of people on there, so it's not a tiny ship, but compared to the humongous ship in the background, we suddenly have this feeling of scale, that tells us that the ship in the background is just humongous and kind of unique in that sense. So that's one way to simplify a composition and to create more of a balance by removing things that don't help you tell a story. And this helps us focus on the relationship between our main subject and supporting subject. And that is one way, just cropping things. But I do realize sometimes you can't just crop things out because they're too close to your subject, or cropping would mean that you would kind of crop your subject. So let's have a look at a couple more examples and visual techniques that you can use to kind of highlight your subject, balance your composition, and establish a relationship between the elements in your composition. Okay, another composition method you can use to establish a relationship and to kind of balance out your image is using frames. And frames in photography as a composition method simply mean having something around your subject that looks like a frame. And the idea here is I'll show you two examples of the same spot that kind of underline what I mean. So in this first example, we have these two friends sitting by the sea and nothing else really. And it's really easy to focus on these two friends because there are no other people, no distracting elements really. But if we look at another example that I took there, and we have this group in the middle that kind of are doing something. We have this lady in the background, and we have someone on the far left. And in this case, it's really difficult to understand what the photo is about because we have too many elements that could be our main subject, and we don't understand the relationship between these different elements. So if we just angle our camera differently and use the frame to block out all these distracting elements that could be our main subject but aren't, we get a photo like this that helps us really understand what the photo is about these two friends. And that's also a good way to block distractions, so to basically hide them, and also to create a kind of visual interest that helps us find out what is actually interesting in the frame. Okay, the next method we can use to create balance and to establish a relationship and a deeper meaning is using foreground or layers in general, like foreground, middle ground, and background. So in this example, we do have a foreground, these boats. We have the middle ground, which is kind of the bridge in the distance and these mountains, not the mountain in the background, just the left kind of mountain. And we have Mount Fuji in the background, our main subject. And I'll just show you a different example, also shot at the same location, that kind of lacks foreground and that kind of misses the balance. So if we look at this photo, to be fair, it's shot at a different focal length, so it's zoomed in, but still this photo feels a little more flat and more two-dimensional because we don't have a foreground that kind of tells us how far we are away from the mountain. And in this case, this photo feels like it's just about, not even about, it's a photo of Mount Fuji. And it doesn't feel like it's about anything. And if we compare it to this photo, I feel like this foreground does two things. It balances out the composition because in this photo, we have a foreground, we have the middle ground and the background, as I mentioned. And that kind of helps us orientate when we discover the photo. If we just had no foreground, it's really difficult to wander around the image because there's nothing interesting and only the mountain that is kind of interesting, but it just lacks something. And it's really not as easy to discover the image with our eyes, basically, because we have no points where we can wander between and think about what is the relationship between these things. So if you look at the better example, I feel like we have more balance because we have different points at the image or in the image that help us discover the photo. And also, the foreground gives us a kind of context about the people living at this place. So, this photo is not just about Mount Fuji looking majestic, it's also about a little bit of a story about these boats. I'm assuming they are fishing boats. I'm not entirely sure, to be fair, but I'm assuming because I saw a lot of fishers at the lake. And suddenly the photo is about fishers or about the idea of fishing at this lake with the view of Mount Fuji. And that's a totally different story that is just a little bit deeper and makes me think a little bit more about the image and, yeah, what it would be like to live at this place. So the foreground here helps us create a relationship between the people living at this lake and the view. And it also helps us orientate in the photo because it gives us something interesting to look at, while at the same time it's not too distracting of the mountain itself. Okay, the next method we have is leading lines. And I know everyone talks about leading lines and they feel like the most simple thing in the world, but I want to focus on something different. So let's have a look at, again, two examples, this time two good examples. So firstly, let's have a look at, one second. Oh my God, I have too many photos open. Okay, let's look at this one first. In this case, this photo feels very calm and very kind of steady. And that's also because of the leading lines, because they're straight, they're diagonal, but they're straight. And that helps us kind of underline the motion of slowly walking down the stairs. And okay, firstly, what I want to talk about is movement and leading lines. So maybe I should have prefaced this section with that. So anyway, the leading lines underline the movement that is very steady of these two because they look like they are on a stroll and they are walking very slowly. And the leading lines match that. If we look at another example, we have, okay, I'm confused. I have too many photos open here. Okay, if we look at another example, these leading lines are a zigzag and they convey a different kind of motion because this whole scene feels a little bit more hectic, I feel like. It looks like this person was rushing down the stairs, maybe to catch a train or something. And the leading lines kind of mirror this feeling of having an unsteady pace. Because if you think about when you take the stairs, you probably have an unsteady pace. You're moving down very fast when you're on the stairs. And when you reach this kind of plateau, you walk a little bit slower and then you move down the stairs again. And the leading lines in these rails, they kind of mirror that motion. And I feel like that's a very nuanced way to underline what our subject is doing, so running basically, and it also kind of helps us again establish a relationship between what's happening in the photo and a visual cue like these leading lines that just underline this idea. And yeah, that's basically it about leading lines, but something that I hear people talk about very rarely. Okay, and lastly we have contrast, which for which we will go back into Lightroom. So in this case, contrast is, in this case, it's about contrast between light and dark. But what I want to focus on again is balance and hiding distracting things. So in this case, I was using the shadows in this image to hide another cyclist. And I'll try to show you, I hope it'll work with the YouTube compression and all. So if I raise the shadows in this image, firstly, you'll notice nothing happens because I shot this on my very first camera, the Sony Alpha 6000 or so. So the dynamic range is not the best, so it's really difficult to raise the shadows. But I'll do something that I want you to never do, and that is to raise the shadows to the extreme just to show you what's happening. So let me just undo this. So hopefully you can see on this left side, beside this image looking awful, you'll see there's another cyclist. Again, cut off. In this case, I don't mind because he's not a supporting subject. He doesn't have the story of this image at all. So he's cut off and he's in the shadows. And yeah, image quality is awful. But what I want you to realize is that I hid him. If I shot this photo and made it brighter, he would have been visible and he would have just distracted from the main subject, which is this cyclist within this slice of light. So if we just revert these changes, okay, if we look at this image again, it's much clearer. We have less distractions. We don't have another cyclist that makes us feel like, okay, who's the subject? And it's very clear what we are supposed to look at and this kind of fleeting moment that I captured. So this is also a great way to yeah, kind of balance the image and remove distracting elements without editing too much, just by making shadows darker and hiding things in the shadows. Okay. And I think this is it already. This is the baseline of composition and everything that I think about when I compose images. And again, all these composition methods I mentioned, I cover more in depth in my free ebook. So you can download it for free via the link in the first pinned comment. And other than that, I hope this video helped you. Let me know if you liked it. If you have any questions, shoot me a comment or a DM, and I'll be happy to reply. And other than that, I hope this helps you create with more intention, and I'll see you next Wednesday.